everybody. My name is Spoons Rattling. Welcome to episode 3 of Painting Every Space Marine Ever. And this episode is Dark Angels. The first step is to dry brush with Angel Green or Caliban Green. This step is to establish the dark green color. I know it's hard to tell on this white background. Sorry about that. Here's the sort of image we're going for, though it's quite low res and blurry. Just take your time and get this over every single armor panel on the model, as this is the main sort of green that the Dark Angels are known for. I'm currently using the Coat d'Arms version, however I know Caliban Green is a relatively close match to the old Angel Green. As you can see, I built up the color here, very nicely here, and it's on the black background now, so you can actually see the color, because the color correction's not freaking out. Now the next step is to establish that mint tone using a mix of intermediate green and Caliban Green. Now you could use, I believe, moot green, but I decided to use intermediate green for the dropper bottles. It is just based on the old snot green made by Games Workshop, as this book is quite old. Mainly focused this on the top-facing areas. I was a little sparse with this step. I do wish I hit his legs a bit more, as it led to a slightly strange appearance at the end, though overall I'm not too upset with it. Here's the next step that we're going for. Oh, and the background almost fell over. Now, while you watch me paint this, I guess I can talk about why I like this color scheme so much, despite its simplicity. My brother played Dark Angels, and that was my first introduction to the hobby, and since this book used to belong to him, I do in fact believe this is exactly how he painted his Dark Angels. In the few surviving models from that army I have, it certainly does look like that. And that's why I do quite like this, and may start a Dark Angels army soon, especially with Azrael getting his release and the Lion's rumored return. Now the next step is the final step for the main color of the armor, and that's just using pure intermediate green, mainly focusing on the edges and the head. This is generally done quite sparingly, just to sort of pick out the most important details. Again, the head and the edges of the shoulder panels are where I focused it most, and a little bit on some of the more sticky-outy limbs. Here is the step that we're aiming for, though mine clearly went in a slightly different direction. I don't think their guide was the best. It seems that they used slightly different colors, slightly darker. However, these are color-corrected photos from over a decade ago. Almost 20 years ago now, actually. Now, I really was quite sparing with this, just doing the top of the backpack, the shoulder pads, his helmet, and I believe I did a little bit of his knee a little later. But this color is quite stark when it's wet, but does dry a good bit duller than it appears, as most paints do. I also painted apparently the back of his thigh, which I forgot I did. Now next up is I mixed together intermediate and angel green again, Caliban green. And I glazed this over the flat areas like the shoulder pads to knock back that dusty effect and also sort of return the green back to its sort of darker color. This is quite a bit brighter than the current Dark Angels color, however I do quite like it. This glaze consistency just takes a good bit of water, at least that's how I did it, and then I let it dry for quite some time, and if it pooled anywhere I just tapped it away with a dry brush. Now the next step is to paint the eyes. I used Lupin Gray from Coat d'Arms, though any gray or white would work, to paint in the eye lenses. As you can see, it takes a couple passes. I also painted his bolter and eventually his chainsword this color, just to make the painting of the red a bit easier later, which is in fact the next step we're doing. Now I started with heavy red from Vallejo, though you could really use any red you desire, just so long as it's dark, whether that's corn red or some other color from, say, Armory Painter. I did just one pass on the eyes mainly, and then I did a couple on the bolter, as we're going to see here in a moment. This is the exact same eye recipe as we saw in my Ultramarines video. So if you've seen that, then you know exactly what comes next. However, if you haven't, I'll go through it step by step. First, you base the eyes quite a dark red. I used heavy red here from Vallejo's game color. I also used this to base the bolter, because you are not a Dark Angel if your bolter isn't red, though the book for some reason pictured it as brass colored, which I thought was strange. However, again, just a few coats later on both the chainsword and the bolter, here you can see that nice red, nice and solid and flat. Now the next step is the next step on the eyes, and that is to paint a brighter red towards the inner sides of the eye. I used blood red from Coat d'Arms, as we'll see here in just a moment. I also used this to edge highlight a bit of the bolter and the chainsword, though it wasn't too noticeable, so if you don't want to do it, I wouldn't bother. Now again, I use a fat brush to keep much finer control for detail work, even though this one's starting to get a hook tip. I'll probably have to order more. I'm also planning on buying some fancier Winsor & Newton brushes. The Winsor & Newton Series S, I believe it was. Is that the name of the company? Regardless, the fat-tipped brushes from Michaels will work just fine. I believe this is a size 5 or something along those lines, if I'm remembering correctly. And then we have the final step where I used orange ink on the very inner points of the eyes, though I'd actually recommend using orange paint for this, as ink's properties can be a little tough in such a concave, small area. However, the effect is still noticeable. Ink takes a while to dry, so again, just apply a little bit and then allow it to dry. And then, of course, apply a dot of white into both corners of the eyes, and inevitably mess up one of the eyes, which I would then have to come back and fix later with heavy red, as well as touching up the helmet with green. And all that's left now is the metallics. I started with his Aquila, which is damaged, as this guy was originally going to be a traitor, at least a Dark Angel, so he's always a traitor, but you know what I mean. So, I painted this gold from Vallejo as my Retributor armor, gave up the ghost and dried up in its pot. Still need to get a new pot of that. However, this gold still works. It's not quite as nice, though, in my opinion. And I used one of my more frayed brushes for this, as metallic paints can mess up fine tips. And then I did lead belcher in all the joints, all the flexible bits, the buckle on his belt, and of course all the gunmetal and chain sword metal. And of course I painted the vents on his backpack, this as well. And if he had a normal helmet, you paint the Vox grill this color as well. Now I did paint this guy as a Beaky. The reason I didn't save that for, say, the Raven Guard is just because I associate Beakies with my brother's Dark Angels a lot, as they always stuck out to me, as there usually was only one per squad or so. Next, I used Rhinox hide to paint his belt. You could use black if you want, but I thought brown added a nice bit of contrast. And if you wanted to, you could also paint his base this color. This sand that I glued on was done before this was part of this series and was just going to be a traitor. And then the next step is the wash step. This model uses very little wash. I literally only washed his Aquila and the gunmetal bits between his joints, on his abdomen, and of course on his sword, and technically on a bolt or combi flamer. You all know how to do washes. A little bit of water, load up the brush, and then paint it all on. Here you can see me applying Nuln Oil over the red of the combi flamer, and of course the metal, and doing the same on the chainsword. I also washed the front end of his flamer with brown, though that's not super important. And that just about wraps up the color scheme. Oh, I also forgot to mention, you can see there, I did paint the shoulder pad skull. Since I believe this guy used a sergeant shoulder pad, I painted that silver as well. However, you could paint it gold if you desired, or just leave it green. Then here's the final result. I did put a little extra green on his helmet just to make it stand out a bit more, but overall I'm super happy with this. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I've been Spoons Rattling, and tune in next time for our next episode, which is on the Black Templars. See ya!